Here is a hot take. I do not like the Houston Astros. I know. Brave of me to come out and say it. And well, it's obviously because of this, and I guess a little bit of this and a little bit of this. But there's a deeper reason to dislike the Astros. Houston winning the 2017 World Series and still maintaining their success today basically came from exploiting a loophole in the collective bargaining agreement. The Astros proved that tanking works. And it doesn't just work, they prove that if your team isn't competitive, it's probably optimal to just say fuck it and not spend any money and lose 110 games. The alternative is to try, finish around 500, miss the playoffs and not develop your farm system enough, but at least you're showing your fans that you at least give a shit, which is what the Astros did in 2010. But in 2011, the Astros were sold to Jim Crane and they went completely scorched earth, kicking off 4 years of being the worst and cheapest team in the league despite being in a top 10 media market. And of course, it worked. They got 3 straight top 2 draft picks, 2 of which became stars. They won a World Series, and they're still one of the better teams in the league today, still riding those 4 years of hard tanking. Not only should this style of ownership and management not work, it straight up shouldn't be allowed since it's so bad for fan bases that just want to watch competitive baseball. And I guess the Astros fans probably don't regret it since they got a World Series out of it, but Houston and the Cubs were kind of on the cutting edge of the strategy to tank so hard you aren't even trying to hide it. Now with teams like Pittsburgh, Colorado, and Texas going into this hard rebuild phase, and teams like Baltimore and Detroit being in the middle of it, not all of them are going to come out of it with a championship or even a playoff run. Fans of these teams don't deserve to watch teams that blatantly aren't trying to win, especially if there isn't a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's where the salary floor comes in. It's exactly what it sounds like. A minimum amount teams have to spend on player salary each season. It's far from a radical idea. The NFL, NBA, and NHL all have salary floors, and they're much closer to their league's salary cap than an MLB floor would be, ranging from 75 to 90% of their respective league salary caps. An MLB salary floor would likely be about half the luxury tax threshold, so between $100 and $120 million. Now, there are some people that might argue that you don't need a salary floor because you don't need to spend money to be good in MLB, and to an extent, they're right. That's where the charts come in. It is definitely true that some of the smaller market teams have found recent success in MLB. The Rays just went to the World Series and have been one of the better teams in baseball over the past decade, while having a cheap-ass owner. Oakland is in a similar boat. Kansas City won a World Series while having one of the 10 lowest average payrolls in the decade. Teams that don't spend can find success by planning for the future and identifying a competitive window, which you can see with Kansas City. They were bad for a while, got a bunch of prospects. Once those prospects reached the majors, they spent on mid-level free agents. Then they won a World Series and almost instantly became bad again, and they've been tanking ever since. Compare this to the Yankees, who haven't had a losing record in almost 30 years because they have the money to spend on free agents, scouting, and prospect development every single year. You've been looking at a slideshow of MLB teams' payroll versus their winning percentage from year to year, and surprisingly the correlation between these two vary from year to year. In some seasons like 2016, there's almost a direct relationship between teams that spend money and teams that win a lot, but in the very next season that correlation is almost non-existent. However, when we look at teams' average payroll from 2010 to 2019 and their total win percentage in the decade, there's a very clear relationship between consistent spending and consistent success, which is not surprising. Poor teams can have windows of success if they make smart moves, but rich teams will have prolonged success as long as they don't make dumb moves. Let's move to the next chart, which shows the frequency of playoff appearances and seasons with a bottom 10 record in 3 different payroll brackets. A team that's in the top 10 spenders in a given season is 80% more likely to make the playoffs than a team that's in the bottom 10 spenders. Conversely, a team in the bottom 10 spenders is more than twice as likely to finish with a bottom 10 record than a top 10 spending team. One more chart here to prove my point. Here is the change in average MLB payroll each year from 2010 to 2019. Plotted with it is the average payroll of teams that make the playoffs, and average payroll of teams with a bottom 10 record, or non-competitive teams. Every single year, on average, playoff teams spend more than the average and bad teams spend less, which shouldn't be surprising. Just for fun, here are where each season's World Series winners rank. 7 out of the 10 seasons, the World Series winner was above average in payroll, and the other 3 times the champ wasn't far from average. All this goes to show that teams like Tampa Bay are the exception and not the rule. The Rays come in at under $100 million in salary every season, so can you imagine how much better they'd be with some more at their disposal, considering they already have the most cutting-edge front office in baseball? They definitely wouldn't have to trade away young franchise starting pitchers. And while you can definitely be good without spending money, when looking at the bigger picture, spending money is almost directly correlated to having a better team over several years. Now, the other argument against a salary floor has a little more merit, that it would actually make it harder for smaller market teams to compete with the bigger markets. A salary floor would make it so you no longer be able to do the Astros strategy of totally tanking your major league team and funneling all your money into scouting and development, while targeting a specific competitive window to spend all the money you saved while tanking. To that I say, outright tanking is just bad for competitive sports. If you take the time and money to buy a sports team, you should be obligated to try and win as many games as possible every year. There's a wave of sports owners that use buying a team as an investment to juice as much profit out of, and which is fine. Sports is a business and owners shouldn't be expected to lose money. But when you make it so transparent that you don't actually care how well your team does, you aren't fit to buy a team. If you aren't willing to spend even half the luxury tax threshold, you are not fit to buy a team. Profits shouldn't come before putting an acceptable product on the field, and when you have the best front office in baseball, like Rays owner Stu Sternberg does, you should be obligated to supplement that with a decent budget, which a salary floor would do. The main purpose of the salary floor would be to deter these bad owners that don't care or don't have the capital to service their fans from buying teams. And tanking, or at least fielding a bad team, is absolutely getting more popular. 2019 had the most 100+ lost teams since 2002, and the most 90+ lost teams since 2004. In 2019, 10 teams had 90 or more losses, which means a third of the teams and a third of the media markets in baseball did not have a competitive team in 2019, which should be a massive red flag for MLB executives and can't be popular among the players on those teams. A salary floor definitely wouldn't have drastic effects on baseball either. A floor of, for example, $120 million would have only affected the bottom 10 teams by payroll in 2020 when you prorate salaries to the shortened season. But among those 10 were 5 playoff teams in Oakland, Cleveland, Miami, Milwaukee, and Tampa Bay that all would have been much better had they just had more money to spend. Especially Tampa, who were probably an impact bat or two away from winning the World Series, and Cleveland, who have been wasting 2 of the best hitters in the league and the best rotation in baseball for the last few seasons because Paul Dolan is a cheap ass. As I've said, owners that can't afford to spend half the luxury tax threshold should not be able to buy a team. But even with that taken into account, teams can still go into rebuilding phases. A salary floor means teams can still divert a higher percentage of their budget to scouting and development, just as long as they spend a reasonable amount on payroll. They could still attract free agents and retain fan favorites, which lets them give fans something to come to the ballpark for, even if the team is below average. Overall, the main purpose of the salary floor would be to force teams to at least try every season. Today we've proven that owners that don't spend money are one of the biggest causes of perennially unsuccessful teams, or teams that can't sustain competitive windows past a few seasons. These owners are unequivocally hurting their fans by not spending, and the best way to circumvent that would be implementing a salary floor, just to put MLB in line with the other 3 big American sports leagues. So to sum it all up, teams that don't spend are definitely worse on average than teams that do spend. Tanking is bad for baseball, and teams that only spend a third of the soft salary cap are bad for baseball. A salary floor would at least help to fix these issues. That'll do it for today. If you want to take a closer look at the charts I displayed in this video, there will be a link to an Imager album in the description. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.